Alright, welcome back. In a previous video we looked at selection, which allowed us to execute some bit of code based on some condition. Now what we want to look at is looping. So this is when you want to repeat some bit of code based on some condition. So let's start by looking at a while loop. And then we're going to look at a do while loop, and then in another video we'll look at a for loop. So let's have a look at a while loop. So here we've got the flow diagram for a while loop. We start from some point in the code with some statements. This could be anything, it could be super complex or super simple, it doesn't really matter. Then we get to the while loop, which is the part here. So we have a condition, and this is the condition that says we want to continue doing something until this condition is false. Okay? So this condition says while this is true, we are going to do some bit of code. Okay, and that's where the while comes in. The bit of code that we repeat is this here, okay, with red. So you can see that these arrows form this loop, okay? So we're actually going back, okay? This is the first time we're seeing our code go back. So basically we come in, while this condition is true, we execute this over and over and over again until this condition is false. And at which point it's false, we exit that loop and go down. So we can have a look quickly at the structure of a while loop. We have the keyword while, we have the condition, and then we have the two braces which indicate this part here, okay, the code that's actually going to be repeating. So whatever's inside of those two braces is what's going to be repeating. So let's just get rid of that. So now we're going to have a look at a bit of code and see this in practice. Now this code basically is trying to allow a user to guess a password. They get one initial guess and they get 3 extra attempts after they've tried the first time. And this is an important concept with while loops, the way that we've set this up here. So what we have first is a little bit of code. That's just basically this here. This could be really long, it could be complex, or it could be quite simple like it is here. Now, we've got one variable which is holding the password, okay, which is 342. Now, obviously this isn't a very good way to store a password, but for our example, it will do. We then have another variable for the guess, so that's the variable that will hold the user's input once they say, have a guess. Important that that's not the same variable as password, because we'd just be overriding our password. We then have the number of attempts. Remember, if they get the first time wrong, they get 3 more attempts, so we start that off as 0. The first go is not counted as an attempt. Now, we prompt the user to enter something, very important. If you don't do that, the user won't know what's going on. And then we scan for the guess from the user. Okay, so we get whatever they enter. So, very important concept of a while loop is that if the user at this point, let's say, entered the guess of 342, we get to this while loop and let's have a look at the condition. So we've got 342 not equal to 342 and attempts 0 at this stage, less than 3. Now 342 not equal to 342 is false. Okay, so that's false. We've got the and we've got 0 is less than 3, which is true. Now because the first part is false, and we've got an and, a false and a true gives us a false. So this means that right at the start, if the user entered the correct value, we just skip the whole while loop, okay? This is going down here, okay? So we'd never execute the inside, okay? So that's the first important concept of a while loop, is that right at the start, we can completely skip the while loop. So it means that a while loop can execute 0 to n times, okay? And this will make a little bit more sense when we see the next loop. So let's say the user didn't enter the correct value. Let's say they entered 322 instead on their first pass. So we're here at the moment. So we've got 322 not equal to 342. Okay, that's true. 0 less than 3, that's true. So true and true is true. So then we print to the screen, incorrect password. Please try again. The user then would enter another guess. So we'd overwrite the guess with another guess. So let's say they entered 128. Then we increment the attempts. So attempts was 0, and now we have it as 1. So that's attempts, that's guess, yep. That's our password. Then, important concept. This might be a bit confusing because we haven't seen it before, but when we reach this brace here, we actually return to the condition. And you can see this here inside of the flow diagram. So here we've got 128 not equal to 342, which is also true, and 1 is less than 3, which is true. We've got a true and a true. And so this has now formed a loop. So this line here of code we've only written once, but it's been executed twice. So we're repeating this bit of code. So we print out to the screen, incorrect password, please try again. And that's printed once again. We then ask the user for a value. So they enter, let's say they enter 111. The attempts then get incremented, so that becomes 2. Okay, and we can see that this is repeating. We get to the bottom and we go back up to the top and we check this condition. Is 111 not equal to 342? Yep, true. And 2 is less than 3. Yes, that's true. So, once again, we go back inside of our loop and we can see here that even though we've written this once, it's now repeating for the 3rd time. So we print incorrect password, please try again. We then scan the user's input, and let's say they entered 64. Okay, we increment the attempts, so that's now going to be 3, and we go back up to the top of the while loop and evaluate that. So we've got 64 not equal to 342, which is true, but this time we have 3 less than 3, which is false. We have a true and a false, so this whole thing becomes false, and so we exit the while loop. So we go all the way from here down to here. Okay, and it might look a bit confusing, but if you follow the flow diagram, you can see that it skips over everything inside there once it's false. We come down, and just down here we've got an if-else statement just checking if the password was correct or not. So here it's not. We've got guess 64 not equal to 342, so print access denied. Alright, so the important concepts here is the fact that we are looping. We only write the thing once, but it executes multiple times. And the other important thing is that the loop can be dependent on the user's input or something that's not known before the program runs. Because we can't just print this out 3 times, because if the user guessed the password correctly the 2nd time, we'd still do this again. Okay, so basically the number of loops we don't know before the program runs, and so this condition allows us to loop as many times without knowing what the user is going to enter. Okay, so it's very important to understand that just copying and pasting this 3 times wouldn't work because we don't know what the user is going to enter. Okay, if you knew that the user was always going to enter the wrong value, then yes, you could put this 3 times, but that's not reality. Okay. The other important thing is with a while loop, we execute 0 to n times, meaning that the first time it may fail and never ever do what's inside of the while loop. Alright, so now we're going to look at the do while loop. So basically how this works is we've got the flow diagram here, we've got the statements before the loop, just like with our while loop, but you'll notice that we come straight from those statements and go straight into the statements that are with inside of the loop. Now how do we know this is the loop? Is because we've got something coming back. So basically this first part here is the do. The statements, like the while loop, are the part between the braces, but we have the while part at the end, and then our condition. Okay? So what this is saying is we execute some statements, then we come in and do what's inside of the loop. Then we check the condition, and if the condition's true, we go back up and repeat and repeat and repeat until it's false, and then go down to the remaining code. Now, what's important about this is the fact that the very first time it executes these statements without checking the condition. So this means that a do while loop executes 1 to n times. So this is different than our while loop that executed 0 to n times. So it does not have to execute the very first time, where this does. So when thinking about this, this is used very often. You can think of it like a menu system. So imagine you've got a game and you open it up. The very first time it has to show you that menu. And based on your selection, it will keep showing you that menu, but it has to do it at least once. So this is where a do while is helpful, is where that something inside the loop has to happen at least once, where a while loop is good when it has to happen 0 or more times. So we're going to have a look at this program here. This program here basically takes a value from a user and adds it to a sum, and when the user enters -1, we stop adding to the sum. So we start at the top with our statements, and we've got our statements here, and we create 2 variables. We've got value and sum. Now, value is not initialized, so it's just going to have some random memory that was there before, and sum's going to have 0. Okay. We then get to the do part. Now this doesn't really do much at this stage. It just basically says where the loop starts, but because it's a do while, we just go straight into it. There is no condition here. It's one common mistake that a lot of students make, is put a condition here. There is no condition here. Okay? It's just do and then the brace. We then print to the user, enter a value to add to the sum, or press -1 to exit. We then get the value from the user using our scanf. So let's take, for example, the user entered, say, 4. We then check if that value is not equal to -1. This is just inside of this statement. As I said, whatever's between these braces can be complex. It might have if statements inside it. This is what this demonstrates. So value 4 is not equal to -1, so we're going to do some summing. So we've got 0 plus 4 gets stored in sum. So that means sum has 4 in it. We then get to this last bit here, which is the while and the condition. Now one big thing here is there is a semicolon. So you won't see with our ifs and our while a semicolon here. Okay, and that's because we're saying if this, do this. So it's all part of the same thing, so we don't have a semicolon there. However, with a do while, what we're doing is we're doing all of this, and so we do need a semicolon at the end to indicate where this do while ends. Okay, so that's one thing that a lot of people forget to add, is that semicolon. There's definitely no semicolon at the top here. You'll encounter problems if you add it there, same with the if statements, if you put a semicolon there. Alright, so we get to this while, 4 not equal to -1, that's true, so we're going to loop, and we go back up to the top, and we can see this in our flow diagram, so it goes to the top of the braces, and we're going to repeat this. So once again, we've only written this once, but it's executing multiple times. So we ask the user to enter a value to add to the sum, or -1. We grab the value, so let's say they enter 2. 2 is not equal to -1, so we add it to the sum. We've got 4 plus 2 gets stored into sum, so we've got 6 in sum. We get to the while condition. 2 is not equal to -1, so we loop back up. We ask the user to enter another value. Let's say the user enters -1 this time. If -1 not equal to -1, so that there is false, so we skip over that. We then check this while condition, and we've got -1 not equal to -1, which is also false, so we exit and we print out the sum. Sum is 6 to the screen. Okay, because that was false, so we go to the end. So that's the difference between the two loops. They're very, very similar, except the do while will execute 1 to n times, where the while loop will execute 0 to n times. So you just need to decide, based on the domain of your problem, which one you would choose. Most of the time you can get away with just using a while loop, but if you can see that it's a suitable problem for a do while, put it in there and try it. Alright, thank you. In the next video we'll look at for loops.